He never threw a punch, yet he knocked out more careers than any fighter alive. Some call him the greatest promoter boxing has ever seen. Others call him the biggest con artist the sport has ever produced. He stood beside Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield, and Larry Holmes. He promoted fights worth billions, collected awards from around the world, and built an empire few could imagine. But behind the towering, electrified hair, the American flags, and the million-dollar smile lies a story filled with prison, lawsuits, betrayal, and accusations that forever changed boxing. This isn't just the story of Don King. It's the story of the man who convinced the world he was selling dreams, while critics insist he was buying them at someone else's expense. If you're fascinated by the intersection of power, greed, and history in sports, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more deep dives into the legends and myths of boxing. To understand the man, you have to look at the blood before the belts. Don King didn't start in a boardroom. He started on the rough, concrete corners of Cleveland, where life was measured in street survival. There are two chapters of his life the world often forgets. One where he shot a man, and another where he stomped a gambling rival to death. One death was ruled justifiable homicide. The other resulted in a manslaughter conviction and prison time. These weren't just mistakes. They were the furnace that forged him. He walked out of those prison walls and into the most glamorous sport on earth, understanding that if you have enough audacity, you can turn a criminal past into a legendary persona. He understood something before anyone else did. In boxing, the fight begins long before the opening bell. If he could sell the story, the punches would sell themselves. He didn't just meet Muhammad Ali, he captured him. Muhammad Ali didn't just elevate Don King. He opened every door in boxing. Once the most charismatic athlete on earth trusted King, everyone else began to believe they should too. By aligning himself with the greatest heavyweight of all time, King didn't just gain a fighter, he gained legitimacy. He orchestrated the Rumble in the Jungle and the Thrilla in Manila, turning boxing into a global, multi-billion-dollar spectacle. He understood something few promoters ever grasped. People weren't paying to watch punches. They were paying to witness history. Every fight became a battle between civilizations, ideologies, personalities, and pride. Before the opening bell even rang, Don King had already convinced the world they were about to witness something that would never happen again. At various points, Don King's roster looked less like a promotional company and more like a Hall of Fame reunion. He promoted Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson, Larry Holmes, Evander Holyfield, Julio César Chávez, Félix Trinidad, Ricardo Lopez, Terry Norris, Bernard Hopkins, and Michael Moore. For nearly 4 decades, if the biggest heavyweight fight in the world was happening, chances were Don King was somewhere in the middle of it. Even fighters who distrusted him often ended up sitting across the negotiating table from him. Why? Because nobody could generate money like Don King. Networks wanted him, casinos wanted him, governments wanted him, and fighters knew that even if they feared the contract, they couldn't ignore the paycheck. It was an irony that defined his career. Don King became richer than many of the champions he promoted. He built this kingdom by mastering the mechanics of the sport like no one before him. King's empire didn't just rely on showmanship. It relied on absolute, ironclad control. He pioneered the practice of locking fighters into long-term, exclusive promotional contracts that left them with little room to maneuver. He negotiated lucrative television rights that made him the gatekeeper to the biggest audiences in the world. He struck massive deals with casinos, essentially deciding where and when history would be made. By controlling the matchmaking, he could build up a fighter's record or orchestrate a fall. He used legal complexity, intricate subcontracts, and revenue splits from multiple sources to ensure that he remained the central hub through which all money passed. He was the middleman, the matchmaker, and the bank all at once. By the mid-1980s and throughout the 1990s, he had become more than a promoter. He had become the gatekeeper of heavyweight boxing itself. His favorite phrase was, "Only in America." It became more than a slogan. It became the foundation of his entire persona. A former inmate standing beside presidents and world champions, Don King sold himself as proof that reinvention was always possible. Even his hair became part of the promotion. That electrified white halo wasn't accidental anymore. It became one of the most recognizable silhouettes in sports, ensuring that before anyone remembered the fighters, they remembered the promoter. He wrapped himself in the American flag, quoted the Bible, and held his fighters close. He called them sons. He promised them the world. And for a fleeting, glorious moment, he often delivered. At the height of his empire, Don King wasn't just making commission checks. He was building generational wealth. Estimates of his fortune ranged well over $150 million during his peak, fueled by blockbuster heavyweight events, television rights, casino deals, and some of the biggest purses boxing had ever seen. In an era when most promoters stayed behind the scenes, he became the brand itself. He lived like royalty, residing in a sprawling, multi-million-dollar Florida estate, traveling by private jet, and wearing tailored suits that cost more than a fighter's annual purse. He stood alongside presidents and moguls, most notably forming a high-stakes alliance with Donald Trump. In Atlantic City, they were two sides of the same coin. Master showmen who turned casinos and combat into a theater of the absurd. The mask he wore, the father figure, the patriot, the savior of black athletes, began to slip as the billions rolled in. Look at the fighters who trusted him most, and you see a recurring, haunting pattern. Mike Tyson, arguably the most famous athlete on the planet, entered the orbit of Don King, believing he had found a guardian. He called him father. But years later, that relationship exploded into a massive $100 million lawsuit. Tyson's accusations were explosive. He alleged that King had surrounded him with King puppets, loyalists placed in critical financial and managerial positions, to effectively isolate him from objective advice and siphon off millions from his career earnings. Critics argued the strategy wasn't merely promotion, it was absolute control. They alleged that King had masterfully manipulated intricate, often one-sided contractual loopholes to siphon off the lion's share of their money, effectively binding them in perpetuity while he walked away with the financial windfall of their sweat and blood. That lawsuit never reached a public courtroom battle. In 1998, King agreed to pay a reported $14 million settlement, without admitting wrongdoing. To Tyson, it was proof his claims had substance. Tyson wasn't alone. Tim Witherspoon successfully sued King after accusing him of coercive contracts. Terry Norris publicly accused him of financial manipulation. Larry Holmes, Evander Holyfield, and numerous former champions all found themselves in legal battles over money, contracts, or unpaid earnings. Different stories, different circumstances, but the accusations echoed with remarkable consistency. Even Muhammad Ali's relationship with King remains a subject of debate. While King helped promote some of Ali's biggest fights, critics have long questioned whether Ali was pushed to continue fighting long after his prime, despite visible signs of decline. Although responsibility is shared among many figures in boxing, King's name is frequently included in those conversations. Tyson's criticism went beyond money. He argued that Don King built his empire on the backs of black fighters while enriching himself far more than the men risking their lives in the ring. Similar sentiments surfaced from several former champions over the years, fueling a long-running debate over whether King was empowering black athletes or exploiting them. King consistently rejected those accusations, insisting he created opportunities no one else would. Perhaps King's greatest weapon wasn't money, it was leverage. During boxing's golden era, challenging Don King often meant risking access to the biggest purses in the sport. Many fighters believed they needed him to become champions, even if they didn't trust him. His business practices also attracted the attention of federal investigators on multiple occasions. Although he survived years of scrutiny and numerous legal battles, the constant investigations only reinforced his reputation as one of boxing's most controversial power brokers. Ironically, while lawsuits piled up, so did the honors. Don King was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame and received multiple Promoter of the Year awards. To the industry, he was a visionary. To his supporters, Don King didn't exploit boxing, he expanded it. They argue he created opportunities that never existed before, helping transform prize fighting into global entertainment while generating unprecedented purses for champions. To his critics, however, those opportunities always seem to come at a price. How can one man be both the savior of a sport and its most reviled figure? Today, the electrified hair is a little whiter, his pace a little slower, but the aura of Don King remains. Even in his 90s, Don King still appears at press conferences, his unmistakable hair standing as one of the last surviving symbols of boxing's golden promotional era. For every fan who remembers the unforgettable nights, there's a fighter who remembers the paperwork. For every championship celebration, there's another lawsuit buried somewhere in a courthouse archive. That contradiction is Don King's true legacy. He gave boxing some of its greatest spectacles while becoming one of its most controversial figures. He remains a living, breathing testament to the idea that in the world of big business, perception is everything. Only in America could a convicted killer become a Hall of Fame promoter. Only in America could a man without a single professional fight earn more than many world champions. And only in America could one man be celebrated as a visionary and condemned as a villain at exactly the same time. In boxing, champions are remembered for the punches they landed. Don King will be remembered for the contracts he signed. He never became a world champion. He never stepped into the ring. Yet when the final bell rang on boxing's biggest nights, Don King often walked away wealthier than the men who bled for the belts. Whether history remembers him as a visionary, a villain, or something in between, one truth remains impossible to deny. Don King mastered the business of boxing so completely that, in many ways, he became the biggest winner the sport has ever known. But what do you think? Was Don King a marketing genius who transformed boxing forever? Or did he build his empire at the expense of the very fighters who made him rich? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of boxing's most controversial figures, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on a notification bell so you never miss our next documentary. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.